Hey there, readers, writers, and friends. Story Serpent here, and today we are talking about Rebecca Ross's Enchanted Letters Duology. This includes the books Divine Rivals and Ruthless Vows. The most recent, Ruthless Vows, was published in December of 2023 by Wednesday Books, which ends up being a Macmillan imprint. And remember, we've seen Wednesday Books before. They're supposed to be a YA fantasy romance, but they read more like a YA historical romance where everything is made up, so no one had to do any research. But before we get into that, today's random words are like, share, subscribe, epistolary. So, what does the first book have to say for itself? When two young rival journalists find love through a magical connection, they must face the depths of hell in a war between gods to seal their fate forever. Okay, so great big world-ending stakes for their romance. After centuries of sleep, the gods are warring again, but 18-year-old Iris Winnow just wants to hold her family together. Her mother is suffering from addiction, and her brother is missing from the front lines. Her best bet is to win the columnist promotion at the Oath Gazette. To combat her worries, Iris writes letters to her brother and slips them beneath her wardrobe door, where they vanish, into the hands of Roman Kit, her cold and handsome rival at the paper. When he anonymously writes Iris back, the two of them forge a connection that will follow Iris all the way to the front lines of battle, for her brother, the fate of mankind, and love. Divine Rivals is an epic, enemies to lovers fantasy novel filled with hope and heartbreak and the unparalleled power of love. So, what we're being promised here is this is going to be a super tropey romance with kind of a fantasy backdrop. We are promised that her position at the Oath Gazette, that's her big goal, that's, where her priorities are, and that we are going to go eventually to the front lines. We've also been promised that this is going to be epic. That's a pretty big promise, and especially when you're talking about epic in terms of fantasy genre, that actually has a pretty distinctive meaning. The epic fantasy genre is, it's going to span the whole world, it's going to have big consequences, the world building is going to be super important because it's going to encompass the whole scope of the book. So to use it here, when you are simultaneously promising that the tropey romance, the rivals to lovers tropey romance, is what's going to be focused on, is really disingenuous, and it's actually misleading given that epic fantasy is a term of the industry, and they're using it incorrectly. So what do we know about the outer trappings of both books? We've got these lovely matte dusk jackets over blue hard covers. Binding looks pretty nice. It went through me, leaving all my notes just fine. In terms of the covers, because Iris is our main character, we have these sort of artistic interpretations of what an iris looks like. And because we're doing everything on typewriters, we have these big old typewriter keys at the front. I will be honest, these did not strike me as typewriter keys the first time I saw these covers. My brain kind of glanced over that. That might just be me, but I think it's because the whole word in each title isn't done in the same style. Even if these had been smaller typewriter keys across the way, I think I would have gotten the whole we're on typewriters thing from the outset rather than me picking up on that after I had already started reading. We have tables of contents, and once again we have a prologue and a book broken down into 3 parts and an epilogue. Now, I personally am finding this whole I'm going to break my book into parts thing really, really annoying, unless you are having a significant jump in time or a significant jump in setting. Not just, this is the next place we're going and that's been set up for us. Like, we understand where things are happening, unless there's a big shift and that's not part of what we would consider the natural progression of the story. I really don't see that it's necessary. it comes off as, but we're putting effort into this thing. It's the appearance of effort without actual effort, I think. In terms of book 2, same things going on. And this time, not only do we have our table of contents where we've got our prologue, our 1, 2, 3, 4 parts this time, but we have an epilogue that is being called the coda, which again is a trend I've been noticing amongst books I've been reading lately. If your book has anything to do with music at all, they're going to call the epilogue the coda because it's a musical term. I don't feel like it's necessary. This is a book, not a piece of music, so if you tell me it's the epilogue, I get it. And I think too many people have done it. At this point, it's becoming kind of cliche, kind of silly. I'm going to confess something to y'all right now. I skipped parts 2 and 3 of the second book. I read part 1. I was so annoyed. I read part 4. I didn't feel lost at all. I didn't feel like I needed to go back and reread anything. There was a character or two, like we got some new named characters in there, but they're so unimportant. Their function is so clear. Like, clearly this is what this person is doing. Okay, fine. But there's no significance to them. I totally got the gist. Book 1 is 353 pages. Book 2 is 411 pages. And I'm pretty sure that those over 700 pages could have been one 350-page book. But let's talk about what's going well. Praise where it's due, right? In terms of the prose, Rebecca Ross is another one of those writers who can craft a really beautiful description. She is really excellent at setting a scene, giving you some visual, maybe physiological details that ground you in the scene really, really well. She's excellent at that. However, 400 pages of description is not a story. The first few chapters of Divine Rivals are really well written. They draw you in. We are in a London analog. That is our city of Oath. We're talking England pre-World War I, kinda. And she really nails that execution in terms of the prose there. The writing style is evocative. It grounds you. You feel like you know what's going on. The story overall nails the trope she promised. It's gonna be rivals to lovers. They even find a way to literally redo that exact same trope over again with the exact same characters in the second book, which feels silly to me, but if that's what you're here for and that's what you're into, I guess you're kind of gonna get that. So at least in book 1, she delivers on the promise of that trope. Let's talk about Iris. In book 1, Iris, our main character, she is feminine, definitely a lady, but she is also strong in the way that women can be strong. She's of character, of intellect, she has skills, she's hardworking, and she loves her family despite her mother's terrible behavior. She does her best to try and help pull her mother out of the addiction that she's struggling with. She's also very human, but I did like that she doesn't have to come across as full-on girl bossy in order to demonstrate strength. Roman starts out competitive and ambitious, and let's face it, the way he's being described, young Henry Cavill, which that'll become important again in just a minute. Both characters are talented and skilled in different ways, and we get to watch them demonstrate those skills, particularly at the beginning of book 1. When it comes to world building, we get a really good sense, like I said, of, we're in an English analog. The city of Oath is London, and we get a decent explanation for the magic and some of what's going on, at least practically speaking, in terms of Iris living out her life, especially at book 1. In terms of the themes, one of the themes that is executed well in book 1, am I repeating myself? Things are being done well in book 1. Thematically speaking, the idea is that war leaves a mark on everyone who engages in it, and whether or not that mark will be a net positive or a net negative, sometimes we're not sure about that. We should be open to letting ourselves be loved, especially by people who continue to demonstrate trustworthiness. When we see that pattern of this is a good person doing good things, they have proven themselves trustworthy, we should let ourselves be open to loving them regardless of other traumas and abandonments and things that have gone on in our lives previously. And so thrilled for this. No sex before marriage. Iris and Roman are both virgins prior to getting married. Spoiler alert, they're married by the end of book 1, in part because the war and their presence at the front makes them feel that need that, like, well, if we don't get married now, we might not live to see tomorrow, so we had best do that today. And then the execution on their intimacy, aka the satisfying bit of the romance, is done with taste. It's not overly graphic. And if you're looking for that little bit of titillation there at the end, you're going to get it. Very satisfying indeed. And given what their role modeling is, I appreciate that very much. I wouldn't have a problem with a teen reading this book. But what's not working is like all of book 2. Because remember that world building I talked about where it's being done pretty well in book 1? We're still left with a heck of a lot of questions. She says that we're in the 1890s, but given that we're talking about rando deities, it's clearly not the year of our Lord, so what does their time tracking reference? We never find out. If you've got deities running around doing magical stuff, and magic makes certain things happen in certain ways, which we never get really a good explanation of. It's a very loose magic system. It's not a hard magic system. Very soft, very fluffy, which is fine. But then we also have electric lights, and we also have chemical weapons, and we also have bombs. Like, all of these things that are the necessity of an industrialization, there's no justification for that whatsoever. When you've got deities making a random mess of your world, and you've only had a few hundred years between the time when crazy deities killing everybody and each other and filling the world with nutso magic, and this supposed post-industrial age, you've got to do the world building on that. Because when you promise readers a fantasy, what you are promising them is consistency in the world building. And unfortunately, she tries to kind of do an explanation. Now remember, I skipped half this book because the endless descriptions got tedious, and the idea of slogging through what is admittedly an overly emotional back and forth between Iris and Roman, I just couldn't do it. And so I'm like, just tell me, okay, let's get to the end. Let's see if the ending is going to satisfy. Remember how much I loved feminine Iris? Remember how wonderfully strong and yet female she was? Yeah, no. By the end of book 2, she's the one carrying a magic sword that she uses to slay the evil deity who started this war from the beginning in a way that is so deeply unsatisfying. There's no reason why she should be the one going into the lair cutting this guy up. And if she does end up going down in there, she should be going in there to find Roman and give him the sword so that he can wreak the justice that is deserved by what evil deity has done to him over the course of both these books. But he does not get that. He has to be literally lamed at the end of book 1, 'cause plot, so that he can spend all of book 2 in a state of perpetual weakness and recovery. It's gross. You described to me that your POV romance interest character is a young Henry Cavill, and you lamed him and turned him into this namby-pamby, maybe I'll write a book now. He is robbed of all ambition. Not to mention, you guys, it takes a special kind of hubris to mention how great a copy editor your wife is and how she catches all of your typos on one page, only to have a typo on the very next page that nobody caught. Moreover, in book 2, I caught typos aplenty, and towards the end of book 1, I caught a few more as well, which means the production schedule did not allow the copy editors enough time to do their job properly, or somebody just got bored and wasn't paying great attention anymore. I understand that a copy edit problem here and there are going to happen. You're going to have 1 or 2 typos every book. That's a thing. But when they are happening on the order of 1 to 2 every chapter, that is too many, especially for an industry professional. That should not be happening. And you all know the story serpent hates dumb adults. Now imagine dumb deities. These are supposed to be highly powerful, deeply ancient, highly intelligent, very clever. They're very crafty. Nothing comes without a catch. You know, it's like we're dealing with the Fae, right? They're very tricksy, supposedly. And yet, the deity we are all supposed to be sort of cheering on and fighting for, especially in the beginning, agreed to stay bound to one particular locality. For why? There's no explanation. She makes a deal with a king to stay bound to one location so that she can kill the other deities, assume their power so that bad guy god can't get it. Again, why didn't she just destroy this king? Why didn't she just use those powers? Why are we waiting until bad guy deity wakes back up before she hands a mortal the god-killing sword and says, go get him? If she could do it all of a sudden now, why couldn't she have done it literally 6 months before this book started? When the foundation of your book makes no sense, when the premise is weak and it falls apart, the story in and of itself will end up being unsatisfying at the end because it was on shaky ground to begin with. If you are a fantasy lover, chances are you show up for the world building. You're here for the magic. You're here for the intricacies of the world and how it works. If you know anything about our history around World War I, World War II, because you're a reader, you read, you know things, you are going to get pulled out of this story again and again by things that should not be present in their world and which there are no justification for. If you are here for the romance, you're going to get annoyed because the back and forth between them isn't driving tension. It's just navel-gazing over emotionality, and by the end of book 2, you don't want her to be with Roman anyway because he's a weak piece of garbage that had to be saved by his girlfriend. He's literally lying on the ground, chained up, holding perfectly still so the monsters don't get him. Can you think of anything lamer for a man to be doing than laying around weak and broken while the women fix everything? As far as the story Serpent is concerned, these get an Insidious. Not because they're pushing a bunch of, gender ideology, not because they're hawking graphic sex or violence. Like I said, no sex before marriage. Well done. But they don't deliver on either of the promises that they're making. They're promising this will be a fantasy, but the world building makes no sense. They're promising this is going to be a romance, which works in book 1 and completely lames itself by the end of book 2. So if you're looking for a fantasy, you'll be disappointed. If you're looking for a romance, you will end up disappointed. These books get the story Serpent, Insidious. I think that's pretty much all we have for today. If there's a story you would like to see the Serpent take on, feel free to put it below in the comments. Until we meet again, read on, write on, and stay sharp.